You know, it's funny how a physical journey can sometimes be a perfect metaphor for a spiritual one. For the patriarch Abraham, his trek across the ancient world, well, it wasn't just about getting from point A to point B. Nope. It was basically a living, breathing map of his faith, charting all the incredible highs and, yeah, some pretty human lows.
So let's really dig into that question because it's going to be the frame for this whole explainer. As we follow Abraham's literal footsteps on a map, we're also going to be tracking the ups and downs of his trust in a promise that, let's be honest, seemed totally impossible.
So what you've got to get is that we're basically on two journeys at once here. One is geographical, right? Moving from what's now Turkey down into Canaan. But the other one? That's spiritual. It's a journey from a simple call to this deep, tested faith. Let's see how those two lines connect.
All right, so our story kicks off in a place called Haran. And you've got Abram, that's what he was called back then. He's 75 years old. I mean, think about that. That's way past the age most people are thinking about starting a new life. And right then and there, he gets this absolutely staggering, life-changing command from God, along with a set of promises.
And these promises, they are just audacious. I mean, let's break it down. Number one, a whole land he's never even laid eyes on. Number two, a great nation coming from his own family. And number three, that somehow through him, every single person on earth would be blessed. This is the bedrock for the entire story.
And here is where we hit the first massive roadblock. God promises a great nation, which, implies a lot of kids. But the reality, the hard fact on the ground, his wife, Sarai, was barren. She couldn't have children. So right from the get-go, this entire story is built on believing in something that looks completely impossible.
So, what does Abram do? In this just incredible act of obedience, he packs up and leaves. That's it. He walks away from his country, his people, his entire life to trek 400 miles into a place he's never been with nothing but a promise to guide him.
And what he does when he first gets there, well, it tells you everything you need to know. He doesn't build a wall or a fortress to protect himself in this new, kind of hostile land. No, he builds altars. First in a place called Shechem, then again near Bethel, he just publicly worships. You see this pattern forming, and it shows this really strong, immediate faith. He's not staking his claim with weapons, he's doing it with worship.
Okay, so he's got this strong faith going, right? But it's about to hit its first major test, a famine. A really bad one, a serious threat to just surviving. And Abram, he makes a faithful choice. He decides to leave the promised land and head down to Egypt, which was basically the breadbasket of the ancient world.
And boy, do things go south fast. This trip to Egypt turns into a total spiritual nosedive. Fear just completely takes over. He's terrified that some ruler is going to kill him just to take his wife, Sarai, who is apparently very beautiful. So he cooks up this desperate plan. Yeah, this is not the same guy who is building altars. This is a man running for his life.
And let's be clear, this wasn't some 4D chess move. The text says it was pure fear. That's it. He lies. He tells Pharaoh that Sarai is his sister. And in that one moment, the entire promise of a great nation, the whole covenant, is hanging by a thread.
And we really need to understand how high the stakes were here. I mean, when Pharaoh takes Sarai into his harem, the whole promised family line is at risk. If she gets pregnant, who's the father? That one lie born out of fear could have completely torpedoed God's plan before it even got off the ground. He only gets out of this mess because God steps in, and even then he gets kicked out of Egypt in total shame.
So a humbled Abram, who's also now kind of rich from Pharaoh's parting gifts, he retraces his steps. He goes right back to the promised land, right back to that altar he built. But a new test is waiting. And this time it's not a famine. This time the trouble is coming from inside his own family.
So pretty soon, his crew and his nephew Lot's crew start fighting over resources. And this is where you see this amazing contrast in character. Abram, who's learned his lesson, graciously tells his younger nephew Lot, hey, you pick first. Take whatever land you want. And what does Lot do? He immediately looks out for number one and grabs the best land for himself, the lush green plains of the Jordan.
You know, the Apostle Paul actually calls greed a form of idolatry, and that is exactly what's happening here. Lot's choice is all about him. He's basically making an idol out of his own prosperity, totally forgetting where it all comes from. And it's no accident he chooses the land that looks a lot like Egypt, the very place his uncle just failed so spectacularly.
And what happens right after Abram does this generous, faith-filled thing? Boom, God shows up and reaffirms the whole promise. He tells Abram, walk through this land, it's all yours, and promises him descendants as countless as the dust on the ground. See that? Abram's generosity is immediately met with God's reassurance.
Okay, this next chapter is where things get really interesting. This is where Abram goes from being just a rich nomad to a major player on the international stage. It's a real climax, and it shows you just how far he's come since that disastrous trip to Egypt.
So here's the setup. Lot gets himself captured. Abram puts together a team, pulls off this daring rescue mission, and is coming home victorious. And on the way back, 2 kings come out to meet him, and each one offers him a choice that is going to define who he is for everyone to see.
And the choice couldn't be more black and white. On one side, you have this mysterious figure, Melchizedek. He's the priest king of Salem, which we think is ancient Jerusalem. He brings out bread and wine and gives Abram a blessing from God Most High. Then, on the other side, you have the king of Sodom, and he offers Abram all the loot, all the spoils of war. It's a classic choice, spiritual blessing or worldly riches.
So Abram accepts the blessing from Melchizedek and even gives him 1/10 of everything as an act of worship. But to the king of Sodom, he delivers this killer line. He says, "No thanks, I won't even take a shoelace from you." Why? Because he wants to make it crystal clear that no man can ever say, "I'm the one who made Abram rich." Only God gets the credit.
And that moment just perfectly captures his transformation. I mean, just think about it for a second. The guy who was so scared he lied about his wife in Egypt is now a decisive military leader. He's standing toe-to-toe with kings, and he's turning down a fortune, all because he's trying to be faithful to God. What a change.
Really, this big choice becomes his ultimate statement of faith. He's come completely full circle. He's not relying on his own little schemes anymore, and he's definitely not relying on the handouts of pagan kings. His trust is now fully and publicly in God and God alone.
So for now at least, Abram's journey from fear back to faith is complete. That choice he made to honor Melchizedek really cements his legacy. But it also drops this huge mystery right into the middle of the story, a question that people would be asking for centuries. Who was this righteous priest king of Salem, and what on earth is his significance?